Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today, getting into some must-add players heading to Week 15 or Week 1 of your fantasy football playoffs. I've got a quarterback, a few more I can mention, a bunch of running backs, and a few wide receivers for you guys to add this week. Again, looking at players that are below 50% rostered that can really help you out. We'll look at some matchups, injuries, all that important stuff you need to know following this week in fantasy football. If you guys enjoyed today's video, hit the like button for me as well. If you are new, subscribe to the channel. We can definitely help you win that title. So hit that subscribe button to look for more content from us every single day. Let's jump into these players. Quarterback position, starting with Matthew Stafford. There are a few other guys you could look to add this week at the quarterback position if Stafford is not available in your league. But for me, he was available in the vast majority of my leagues, 57% rostered. He's currently the quarterback 17 on the year, but as of late has been super productive. He has posted 3+ touchdowns in 3 straight games. So definitely someone that has really helped you out if you have added him already, but should still be available. Getting the Commanders this week as well, which is huge for us because this defense is second to last in fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position this season. An offense that's really struggled, especially since losing Chase Young and Montez Sweat. The pass rush has really fallen off. That's put more stress onto their secondary, which ultimately lacks a lot of talent as well. And I see him in this game going, at least 250 yards, should throw for a couple touchdowns as well in this game. So love Stafford. I think honestly, this is a quarterback that is still top 10 quarterback probably in the league, top 15 for sure, probably top 10, I would say, playing at a really high level. This offense and this team looking to get into the postseason. The Commanders are giving him a great chance to do so and a great chance for this offense to continue to click after a big game against the Ravens this past week, a team that is one of the best defenses in the league. So expect that to continue here against the Commanders. If you don't see Stafford available on the wire, there are a couple other spots I do like. Russell Wilson against the Lions defense. The Lions are really good against the run, not so good against the pass. The Packers get the Bucs as well. That's a pretty good matchup for quarterbacks in the passing game that should see some good volume. And even go back to Joe Flacco after a couple decent games. The Browns get the Bears. Definitely need the passing game if you're going to beat that Bears team too. All right, now to the running back position. Got a number of guys here. Let's start with the injury news and how we react to it. Zamir White, who is 2% rostered right now. Josh Jacobs goes down with a knee injury, was kind of trying to read the tea leaves or understand what this injury might look like. It looks like it could be like a hyperextended knee, which is something that you can get back from, but talk about a team that played at 4 o'clock on Sunday, now play Thursday night against the Chargers. Can we get that turnaround for Jacobs to be back into the lineup? I'm probably leaning towards not. Now, do I think White is a player that you can really trust and how much you should be spending with your FAAB to get him? We've got a Chargers team, 20th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Haven't been an extremely good run defense this season, but have been they've been okay. Definitely not one of the worst teams in the league. Definitely very much improved. White, I think, will be the guy early downs. He is a capable pass catcher, but I think they'll go to Amir Abdullah in those situations on 3rd down and whatnot, so it might take away some of his value. Obviously, the Raiders offense struggling last week, failing to record even a single point, but the Chargers are going to be going with Easton Stick likely at QB, so that puts is into a matchup here where there's some decent potential for the Raiders to win this game, being at home as well. There's a good chance he can get us a good game script here for White to be able to get a good amount of touches. And we've seen the way this team has treated their RB1 in Josh Jacobs in terms of volume. Don't think they'll treat White the exact same way, but there's a world where I could be starting him. If you guys want a better idea of where I have him ranked or who to start him over, we'll have the running back rankings video coming out tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But White's definitely a good ad that's available practically every week right now. Next, going to Minnesota with Tai Chandler. He's a player we talked about quite a bit. He's 22% rostered, so pretty widely available as well. Alexander Mattison going down with an ankle injury. Looked to be an ankle sprain. And really for Mattison, he had a stranglehold on the RB1 role in this offense in this particular game. Chandler wasn't getting on the field much. Mattison had his role and was looking to do quite a bit with it in this game early on before the injury. But Chandler, capable guy of taking over. They get the Bengals this coming week, which is a good matchup for running backs. They're 21st in fantasy points allowed to the position. They are dead last in EPA per rush against. So a good matchup for their run game to be able to move the football. We're likely to see Nick Mullins at QB moving forward. And then also the potential of missing Justin Jefferson. So that really puts a damper on the passing game and could see more focus on the run game. This is also a back in Chandler who's capable of playing a 3-down role, getting on the field and passing downs, catching passes as well. They have Kenny Nwangu, who's someone that can get onto the field and spell him a little bit, but wouldn't expect him to have a huge impact on his role overall. So we'll wait to see the best news we can get on Tuesday night when you go to submit your claims. But there's a good chance Chandler's the starter for this game, and he could be a pretty viable one heading into Week 15. Next up, the Chiefs' backfield. Another one dealing with injuries. Obviously, this was one that you probably found out about earlier last week and could have made some additions to your roster in the meantime. So we're going to talk Jerick McKinnon, but I'm going to talk both of these guys and tell you which one I think is best. McKinnon right now, 41% rostered. He is obviously the guy that found the end zone this past week and was able to put together a decent performance with the opportunity he did get. The timeline for Pacheco and the shoulder injury, I can't really get a great read on because there were murmurs and questions about, hey, is he going to go to IR? But then Andy Reid said this is something he can return sooner rather than later, but I don't think sooner than later necessarily means this coming week. It could mean, before the end of the regular season. So I think there's a pretty good chance he misses this week as well against New England. We shall see, though, especially with a team that comes off another loss to the Bills, reeling a little bit. 1 seed is no longer pretty much realistic. This is a team that needs to hang on to their lead in the division and get to the postseason. So we could see Pacheco try to make his way back. But this week, get the New England Patriots, who are the #1 defense in opponent EPA per rush. So they're a pretty good run defense. But it's also a team that struggles immensely to put up points, and probably a game the Chiefs will have pretty well handled. So that means they could lean on the run game late, and the offense can just kind of get through this game and get out of there with a W going to New England as well. So that puts us in a spot here where the potential of McKinnon producing on passing downs is definitely there. He's a great pass catcher. He'll be the top pass catcher. He'll be on the field in 2-minute drill situations. And in half PPR or full PPR formats, full PPR especially, it can really raise your floor. Like, it raises the floor for McKinnon and raises the floor for your team. But for Clyde, I see more, the opportunity for him is going to be early downs and rushing work. And when you get that game script that could lead to, that is a positive one with a lead, you're going to probably run the football a little bit more, which is what we didn't see from Kansas City this past week, because the Bills were up 14-0 early in this game. The Chiefs were in comeback mode, trying to get back into things. That means they were passing the ball a fair bit more. And that meant we saw McKinnon on the field more than we did Helaire. And we saw last season as well, when Pacheco didn't really earn that top role in this offense like he's had this season. McKinnon was actually the guy getting the ball in the red zone and scoring touchdowns, while Helaire was a little bit harder to find. But we look at the matchups they have to close out the season: Las Vegas, Cincinnati, two teams that struggle against the run. I think Clyde is probably the better choice, and right now he's more widely available. I think in this particular week too, if the Chiefs are taking care of business, Helaire could get some decent volume, and he definitely has a better profile to score touchdowns when you're looking at the traditional rushing role. McKinnon scored a lot of his red zone touchdowns as a receiver, like we saw this past week. I would prefer Helaire just because of the potential of upside. Like, I could see Helaire being the guy finding the end zone multiple times in this game in that traditional rushing role, where McKinnon has a higher floor. Look, both of these guys are good ads. Helaire will be more available. He's the guy I was able to pick up more often than McKinnon was if you added him before the end of the week. So I looked at Helaire, but both of these guys are players you definitely need to add this week. Okay, our last running back, Rico Dowdle, 10% rostered. As a Tony Pollard owner, I was pretty pissed off as I'm trying to get into my fantasy playoffs in the last week of the season, and I've seen Dowdle on the field as much as he was. Before their last drive of the game, where they were kind of killing the clock, looking to end the game, Pollard had less rush attempts than Dowdle did. Like, Dowdle was getting the ball in those obvious running situations a little bit more than Pollard was, and he received more goal line opportunities, which really annoyed me because Pollard has been terrible in this area of the field. So I can't blame McCarthy for going to Dowdle as someone to look to get, what they need, which is converting those short yardage opportunities. But it wasn't like Pollard, came off the field after a long run. They could have gone to either one of these guys, and they went to Dowdle for like a few carries there when he finally found the end zone and scored. So that's where there's some real intrigue, is scoring touchdowns in this offense. Now, I don't think we're going to have those matchups where, the Cowboys are going to be blowing teams out, because their next 3 games are pretty tough. They go Buffalo, Miami, and Detroit. And Miami and Detroit especially have been pretty solid run defenses, so they're not necessarily plus matchups. No blow, I shouldn't say no blow-up potential, but like less of blow-up potential in this game. And this is still very much a pass-first offense when they get into those competitive game scripts. So not necessarily saying that Dowdle is someone that's going to, put together 15, 16 touch games and really have a high floor. He's we're looking for ceiling. And the reason the ceiling might be there for Dowdle and why I want you to add him is this is a team that leads the league in red zone scoring opportunities, 4.4 per game. The next closest team was at 3.9 per game. So if they're getting in the red zone, getting those opportunities to score, it looks like Dowdle might be the bigger beneficiary than Pollard is, which impacts Pollard and his ceiling, impacts Pollard and his playability, but doesn't necessarily mean Dowdle's someone I'm smashing the start button on. But there's real intrigue here that, potentially, in your fantasy championship game against Detroit, you could see the opportunity with Detroit's defense struggling that, hey, he could score some touchdowns. Hey, that ceiling is there. Or, hey, I'm a big underdog in my matchup. And Dowdle gives me that little bit of thought of, hey, we could see 2 touchdowns from him and he could maybe win me by week. So definitely feel like he should be someone you have on your bench as obviously a great handcuff as well. Okay, now to the wide receiver position. I've got 2 for you, and I'm very, very much intrigued by these 2 guys and definitely think they can't be left on your wire for another week, starting with Zay Jones, who's 29% rostered. We all obviously saw Christian Kirk go down and is going to be out for the remainder of the season with his groin injury. We're not exactly sure, but I think a lot of you might know what could potentially be the issue there. But Parker Washington's going to step up into that slot role for this team and take over for Kirk. But what I want you guys to know and be aware of is we saw even in the first few weeks before Zay Jones went down with the injury, Jones was staying on the field more often than Kirk was, and that'll be even more so now with Parker Washington, which not being the same talent that Kirk is. So Jones will be on the field in 12 personnel. He ran a ton of routes last week, 52 routes run, had like 12, 14 targets in this game, and Ridley ran just a few more routes with 55, while Washington ran just 35. So kind of exemplifies what I'm talking about. Jones is going to get tons of opportunity here. I don't necessarily want to play him this week against Baltimore, who's one of the best fantasy defenses in the NFL, but he's a great stash for a Week 16 matchup against the Bucs, a Bucs team that's very difficult to run the football on, will need to lean on the pass game. And they have been pretty bad against receivers, 29th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position so far this season. So Jones could be a great start heading into that week. And there's proven pedigree with Zay Jones when it comes to late last season, being productive and just overall from last season before Ridley, obviously without Ridley in the fold. Now Ridley's in the fold, but we take away Christian Kirk. Jones was 7th in the entire league in end zone targets last season. This is a player that can get the perfect opportunities to produce for your fantasy team and give you that explosive week. So definitely feel like he needs to be added with the amount of targets trimming here for Trevor Lawrence as we get to the end of the season. Next up, Noah Brown, the Houston Texans. 49% rostered. He's right on the precipice of a guy I wouldn't be talking about. I originally was going to go to another receiver on this team, but felt like Brown needed to be talked about, and then we'll talk about the rest of this wide receiver core. Nico Collins goes down with a calf injury. This is an injury that he's dealt with in the past, last season, kind of dealing with these muscle injuries, whether it's calf, whether it's groin, and it could be something that keeps him off the field for next week or for the next couple of weeks. And Houston has a great finish to the fantasy season where Collins could have been the guy that wins you a fantasy championship because they go Tennessee, Cleveland, Tennessee. And the Titans have been so bad to fantasy wide receivers. They're 26th on the season, but specifically receivers that run their routes out wide. They are third. They've given up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to receivers that play on the outside. That's what Nico Collins does, and that is also what Noah Brown does, because since week 10, when Nico Collins made it back, because when Robert Woods was down, we saw Noah Brown play more of his running routes from the slot. But now that we see Tank Dell out and potentially Nico Collins out, Brown is going to run those routes from out wide. 70% of his routes since week 10 have been out wide as it is, and was around just over 70% this past week as well. Stroud has been an elite deep ball passer this season, perhaps the best in the league. 57.1% completion percentage on passes of 20-plus air yards, which is second. He's thrown 7 touchdowns on these passes and 0 interceptions. The Titans, though, what they have done really well is take away slot wide receivers. They've allowed the 7th least fantasy points to slot wide receivers. And that's where Robert Woods runs his routes. Woods is a guy who will work in the slot and he'll also stay on the field. Like, he's going to run the most routes for this team for as long, probably potentially even if Collins is back, he could run the most routes on the team for the rest of the season. That's just what he does. He's consistently out there, but the production just hasn't been there despite all this opportunity to be on the field. Where I have some intrigue in a deeper league, or just if you have a lot of bench spots to stash, is Xavier Hutchinson. He's a rookie out of Iowa State, a guy who last season with the Cyclones had 161 targets. He actually didn't have a single game where he had less than 10 targets in a game. So he's a player that could potentially take what he did in college and be able to put that together into the NFL, not to quite the same degree, but he could be a target hog in this offense once he finally gets on the field, because he hasn't really been getting on the field since the emergence of Tank Dell, but now needs to get on the field. Him in college, he played exclusively out wide. That's what he was doing this past week as well. You know, he ran more routes. If you're thinking about a guy like John Mechie, he ran way more routes than Mechie did this past week. And I think depending on the absence of Nico Collins and what the length is, Hutchinson could be a really sneaky ad that I can't trust to play him this week, but if you stash him and then that Titans matchup comes up again in 2 weeks from now, then you can potentially go to him. Because again, there's a real opportunity for explosive big plays and big production from this offense, which we've seen from CJ Stroud all season long. Like Tank Dell putting up 150 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Collins doing that as well. Noah Brown is a player I definitely want to add, but again, he's right around that 50% mark, so he might not be available. But if Brown is available, he's got to be your number one ad this week because he could have a huge week against the Titans in Week 15. Those are my favorite ads heading into Week 15 of the fantasy football season or your fantasy playoffs. Again, guys, if you enjoyed the video, would really appreciate if you hit that like button as well. Subscribe to the channel because we'll have more content to help you win your fantasy championship this season. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.